What's up YouTubers, Johnny DIY here. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to build a cheap and easy DIY bed frame, and we're going to make it out of construction materials, mainly 2x4 lumber. If you guys are new to my channel, please do me a favor and click the subscribe and the notification bell so you can get all my new videos. Alright, let's get to this one. Here's my design and the measurements. Now if you're not making a twin size bed, all you have to do is adjust the width of these rails for the footboard and the headboard, as well as the width for the slats. So I had a couple of these twin size box spring mattresses that I figured I may as well take apart and get the wood. I already took apart one, and it's just mostly all 1x4 wood. I'm gonna go ahead and take this one apart. I'll try and tally up the amount of wood if you need to buy for you guys. Here's all of our wood. I'm just going to go ahead and cut all the pieces first with my measurements. Okay, so this is going to be the basic layout of the headboard. I went ahead and actually cut these ones out of 2x3s. You could make it out of 2x4s. You just want to adjust the total width about 2 inches smaller. So I've got this top rail about 1.5 inches down from the top, and then I've got about 6 inches between those two. You could go ahead and add a third one. I'm not gonna, because I'm gonna have my bed set a little higher. And then I've got one more rail down at the bottom, about 12 inches up from the bottom. And here's the footboard. It's gonna be about the same thing, 1.5 inches down from the top, and about 8 inches in between, which is 7 inches up from the bottom. Now how are we gonna join these rails to the posts? You could simply screw 2 3.5 inch screws in from the side into these rails. You could use pocket holes from the rail into the post. I'm actually going to do a little mortise joint, a 1/2 inch mortise in on this joint right here. That's going to make it really strong, maybe in case someone stood on one of these rails, especially on the footboard. I know kids like to stand on these sometimes. That'll just really strengthen this all up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set my circular saw depth to a 1/2 inch deep. Now you could do this on your table saw as well. I clamped a scrap of 2x3 on each side of where our mortise is going to be, so that when we use our circular saw, sometimes it dips on the edges in the front and it'll go deeper. This should help prevent that. Now we can take our little hammer and hit those chunks out. You can also use your chisel. That's what the joint's gonna look like, all cleaned up. Be a nice little joint. Now I'll just do the remaining 4. This is my favorite part. I figured out if you make one cut first and then take the actual board that's going to be in the joint and line it up with the very edge, then you can go ahead and mark it. That way you'll have a tighter fit on the board that's actually going to go there, because some of these sticks are actually different widths. Before we assemble, I'm going to give everything a once over with some 150 grit sandpaper. You could use 220 as well. I just think it'll be easier to get the inside rails before we assemble it all. Let's go ahead and pre-drill those holes for those cross pieces in the headboard and footboard, and we're actually going to countersink these too. So we're going to countersink those below the surface just a little bit, maybe like a ½ inch. That way we can use a piece of this dowel and jam it in there and cut it flush to cover up the head of those screws. Now we can go ahead and start screwing these rails onto that joint, and we're going to use regular old wood glue. This is Type Bond 2. Let it soak into the end grain of these rails, and you may need to recoat it because the end grain usually sucks up a bit. We'll go ahead and start both first before tightening it down. Tighten it until you get a nice glue squeeze out. Go ahead and wipe that off with a wet rag. Make it easier. Clean up. Then we're going to take a little piece of our dowel and put a little bit of glue on the edge of the dowel. And we're going to put it in the hole and try to line up the grain of the wood with the grain so it matches more. We'll just tap it in. I'm going to take our flush saw. Trim that off. I'll make sure I put links down in the description to all the tools and supplies that I'm using today for you guys. See, then we can take our sander and then see how nice it looks. And then when you stain this wood, it should blend in pretty well, as long as you get a similar type wood for this dowel. Now some of these 2x3s have a real sharp edge on them. I'm going to go ahead and use my router to put a 1/4 inch round over on that. I sanded these joints to make them look a little tighter, but as you can see, there's still a gap on some of these joints. So an easy trick is, if you take some of the sawdust from your sander dust collector, and then you take some of your wood glue, you can make your own wood putty. Just go ahead and mix it up. Mix it up till it becomes a nice putty. And we're gonna go ahead and spread it in that crack. And then all you have to do is come back after it dries and sand it, and it should give a nice smooth finish. Alright, well, I'm working on the footboard now, and I kind of ran into a problem of my own doing. Now these are the brackets I'm going to actually use for the rails, to put the rails on, to hang them on. These are actually hanger brackets for 2x4s. They come in different sizes, 2x6, I think even 2x8, but they're decorative hangers for construction. I'll make sure I put some links down to these in the description for you guys. But where I plan on putting it on the footboard, it's kind of where one of my joints is going to be for the rail. So I'm not really going to be able to drive screws into here if I've already got screws here, because they'll run into each other. So I think I'm going to have to use some dowel pins for this joint. So I'm just going to make some 1.5 inch long dowel pins out of that same dowel that we used to cover up the screw heads. We'll go ahead and chamfer the edges so we'll be able to fit in a little better. Now you could use all dowels for all the joint construction. Dowel construction is a little nicer because you're not going to have any of those heads to cover up at the end like we did on the headboard. Just takes a little more time. So to do the dowels, I don't have a doweling jig, so I just made this little template out of a piece of cardboard, and then I can line it up with the joint and push it down to the bottom, and then I'll just do a couple pilot holes through there. And then I'm just going to transfer it, and I'll just transfer the template onto the end of the rail, making sure to line it up just like the other one was. And then I just mark the depth on my drill, half the size of the dowel, plus just a hair over, so a little over 3/4. And then I can go ahead and drill these. And then you always want to test fit, so I'll go ahead and put a dowel in on each side. Now that'll be real strong. I should have just gone ahead and did this on the headboard. It wasn't much harder. Alright, time for the glue up. We're just going to glue it all up, put the dowels in, clamp it down. Kind of got to move fast with this kind of glue, so don't dilly-dally. Wipe off all the extra glue. have any clamps big enough, so I'm just going to use these ratchet straps. I'm going to use a scrap piece on top so it doesn't gouge the wood, the straps. Just going to clamp it until we get some nice glue squeeze out. And we should know it's nice and closed. That joint. There we go. Got some nice good glue squeeze out. All those joints are nice and closed up. Clean that up, and then I'm gonna go ahead and let this set, I think just overnight. Now it's time to put these brackets on. Now these brackets actually have a little bit of a give to them. If you squeeze them, they kind of move. So I'll just put the bracket on a piece of scrap of 2x4. Then I can go ahead and clamp the bracket until it's not tight, but there's a little bit of a resistance so that we can get those holes where they need to be. Then I cut another scrap of wood the exact length that I want those brackets up on the headboard and footboard from the ground. I can line that up from the bottom and then put my bracket right on top of that. Go ahead and mark all those holes. And we're gonna pre-drum just a little bit. This wood's pretty soft, so we don't want to give away too much of our biting power. And I've got some 1.5 inch screws. Then I like to finish tightening those off by hand, just so I don't over tighten them and lose that biting power. You can really feel the torque when you do it by hand. Okay, so here it is roughly put together. Now I went kind of high on mine because I'm gonna actually put a trundle bed underneath. Now all we need to do is attach the cleats on each rail, so then we can start putting those slats on. For those cleat boards, we're just gonna be using regular 2x2 lumber. You can buy this, or you can just rip a 2x4 in half on your table saw. Put that cleat right at the bottom of the rail. I just did a few screws first, that way we can put the glue down. Be easier to line up. Alright, then we can go ahead and load it up with glue. So it'll look just like that, and then we can put the slats resting right out here on top of that cleat. Alright, well I just loosely set it up and put a ratchet strap around it just so we can kind of get it square first. So I'll just run a tape measure from corner to corner on each side and compare those, and then adjust the headboard and footboard until we get them nice and square. With it all squared up, I went ahead and marked the screw holes for the sides of those brackets, and then we can also measure for our slats and start cutting those out. Gonna need a bunch of those. I'm gonna use a bunch of those scraps of wood that I tore down from those box springs. You're gonna wanna place all your slats with the crown facing up. And what I mean by that is if you sight your wood down the middle, as you can see, it's curving like that. So you want the hump to be facing upward. It's gonna be the best, because if you put it the other way, it's just gonna end up sagging in the wood and it's gonna be a lot weaker. These slats are just 1x4s. You could use 1x3s too. Depending how much weight you're going to be putting on depends how many slats, and the more slats the firmer the bed will be as well. I've got a ton of these slats from the box spring, so I'm going to use these up. Plus I like a firm mattress. Now this is optional, but I think I'm going to go ahead and run one more piece down the middle connecting all the slats. That'll just really strengthen everything up. So I'll just go ahead and flip the slats over. I'm just gonna go ahead and tack it with some nails first. I decided with these brackets, see, they only have one hole here and one hole on the opposite side offset. I decided I'm gonna actually drill another couple holes. That way I can just take a normal bolt and run that bolt all the way through and put a nut on the other side, and it'll clamp it onto the rails. I just use my combination square to gauge where the center of that hole was. And then I can use that same measurement to move it on down. And on the other side to match it up. And mark the new holes that we just drilled on those brackets. Well, now that I'm using bolts instead of screws, I didn't really have any, but I found some of these carriage bolts that I had enough of them. So I think I'll just go ahead and put a slot in these to make them a flathead. Now before we finish the wood, I'm gonna go ahead and give everything a nice little wipe down just to get off any of the dust or sawdust that's left over on the wood. You could also use a tack cloth to make sure you don't leave any residue behind. Okay, now to finishing it. You can leave it natural, paint it, stain it, oil it, whatever you want. I'm gonna be using some satin varnish. And it's important, if you're going to use varnish or any sort of polyurethane, that you stir it and not shake it. If you shake it, you can end up getting bubbles in your finish. Plus, things can settle in the can, and it's important to integrate those into it evenly so you get a nice, even finish. So make sure you stir before you use your finish. This is an oil-based varnish. So when you brush this finish on, you just want to make sure you're going with the grain and that you do a nice even finish stroke. So 2 coats is usually good with something like this. It just depends on what you want. Even 1 you may be happy with, 2 on the areas that get a lot of use. Okay, then finally I'm just going to put about 4 screws on each side just to kind of tie everything together, and these will be removable since we're not using any glue or anything. Okay, here it is all set up. I tested it out. It seems to be plenty sturdy. I'm really happy with how the finish came out. I used that oil-based varnish, and it really gives it a nice, rich amber color. But hopefully you found something in this video helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and click the notification bell. That way you can get all my new videos. Thanks for watching Johnny DIY. Keep on doing it yourself, guys. Take care.